welcome to Killer Cafe Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer. Welcome. Hello. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and if you're not, I hope it only gets better. I hope you had a beautiful week. I hope you enjoyed the video that came out on Friday. It was all about Lori Vallow, as today of me posting this video, her jury selection has continued, but if they are finished, then she will go to trial. It is a wild case here in Idaho, and I can't believe that it's finally happening after all these years. But that's not why we're here today. We're actually here to talk about another case that happened up here in Idaho, and it's actually in Coeur d'Alene. This happened in 2005, and the notorious serial killer that most people don't know about is Joseph Edward Duncan III, and how a family was almost massacred. Well, most of the family was massacred, and thankfully one little girl was saved. Unfortunately, the torture and abuse that she endured is only just horrific. But before I move any further, this does talk about a lot of sexual assault, sexual abuse, torture, and all of that nature. If this does not make you comfortable, please go back, watch some of my paranormal stuff, or if you want to, just wait until next week, and I have a new one coming out as well, but that is the missing persons one. But if this does make you uncomfortable, please move on, and I will see you all next week if that is so. But with all that being said, grab a coffee, grab a blanket, and let's dive on in. Born February 25th of 1963 in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Joseph Edward Duncan III was the fourth out of 5 children, with the older sisters and a younger brother. Now, his parents did divorce in 1979, and he later said in 1980 after his arrest that his parents were abusive, but none of the other siblings can corroborate that abuse. The year prior, in 1978, he was arrested, and that was his first ever recorded criminal crime of sexual abuse against a 9-year-old at gunpoint. And in 1979, he was later arrested again, but this time for stealing cars. And then later in 1980, he was arrested and convicted of raping a 14-year-old boy, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was later released on parole in 1994 and decided to move around to different places, including the Seattle area, California, back to Washington, and a couple other spots. He was later arrested again in 1996 due to the use of marijuana, and then after that, for several weeks he was in prison, but later released again on parole, only with a lot more restrictions. Later in 1997, he violated his parole terms again and was later put back in prison and released in 2000. Now, between 2000 and 2005, I tried to find some information, but not really anything is fully fleshed out. There are a few accusations here and there, other than the fact that he was found for molesting and was on the run. There's not much else to be said about what happened. March of 2005, Duncan was charged and arrested for the June 2004 molestation of 2 boys in a playground, and on April 5th of 2005, bail was set to $15,000. A businessman who Duncan was very close acquainted with was ready to pay his bail, but Duncan skipped bail and fled, and then on June 1st of 2005, a warrant was issued out for his arrest on a charge of unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. On May 16th of 2005, the bodies of Brenda Groene, Mark McKenzie, and Slade Groene were found in their home in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. The 2 other children of Brenda Groene were missing, and police quickly sent out an Amber Alert for Dylan and Shasta Groene. Their homicides were later characterized as blunt force trauma to the head, and the police were quickly on alert for Dylan and Shasta. 7 weeks later, in a Denny's in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, a waitress noticed that Shasta matched the description of the missing little girl and quickly alerted her manager, which alerted the police and came and arrested Joseph Edward Duncan and quickly grabbed Shasta. They later found out from Shasta that Dylan was shot and killed in front of her while they were in a campground in Montana. On July 4th of 2005, Dylan's remains were found in the campgrounds in Montana. Much of the murders are only known because of Shasta, as though she didn't see the killings of her older brother, mom, and her mom's fiance. She did hear the loud thumps that she associated with their deaths. Shasta and Dylan were kidnapped and taken across state lines into Montana, where for the next few weeks they were tortured and raped by Duncan himself. Shasta later told investigators that Dylan was murdered, though Duncan claims it was accidental, where as he was rummaging around, a gunshot went off, hitting Dylan in the stomach, and Duncan, instead of trying to save him, later reloaded the gun and shot Dylan in the head, later killing him. A public memorial service for Dylan was held on his birthday of July 16th of 2005, where he would have been 10 years old. Shasta also reports that Duncan nearly killed her, but after he had wrapped the cord around her neck, she began pleading with him to not kill her, and instead he asked if she would like to meet his mother, and she agreed, where they later started to head back towards Washington, where they stopped at the Denny's in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Before we get into his charges of Idaho, I would like to go through his parole stuff, because this is just, to me, as I was researching this, wild to find and see all of the stuff that he had done, and the police, I personally think, just let him slip through the cracks. I am going to read it word for word just because it's a lot, but I think it is prevalent to the case and what happened to this family and how he possibly got away with a lot more murders, which later on he was convicted of one, and two he later confessed from 1996, but I don't believe they ever convicted him of it. So, after being paroled in 1996, he traveled through the Seattle area and to several other states, and here are the state probation records of his movements. So, September 26th of 1994, he was reportedly unsuccessful for parole. Duncan is released to a halfway home in Seattle and starts treatments with a counselor. October of 1994, he does land a job doing phone soliciting for Time Life Books. April of 1995, he moves out of the halfway home and into some apartments in Seattle. Again, in April of 1995, he spends Easter with his mother in Tacoma. May of 1995, he visits his father in Las Vegas. June of 1995, he looks into schools offering courses in computer science. January of 1996, meets a married Seattle mother of two and begins dating her. January also of 1996, he begins a new job in a software company. August of 1996, he then moves in with a gay couple in North Seattle. October of 1996, because of the marijuana use, he was then arrested, but he tells police that he's worried about losing his jobs and his kittens. Don't know why that matters. And he was then paroled again, but with new restrictions. You're kidding me, right? Worried about your job and your kittens. Oh, the 90s. December of 1996, he gets to spend Christmas with his sister in Washington. He's now, according to the records, working two jobs. On March of 1997, he then tests positive for marijuana. March 25th of 1997, later on, he then quits his telemarketing job. A couple days later, in 1997, he then calls his parole officer, angry about a polygraph test result, and he says that he's calling from his mother house in Tacoma. Then in May of 1997, a family friend says that Duncan called his former roommates a week earlier and that the call was from Northern California. In August of 1997, FBI task force then arrested Duncan at his half-sister's home in Kansas for violating his parole. And in September of 1997, a North Dakota doctor named Richard Waxman hires an attorney for Duncan, and he later tells Duncan's parole officer that he met Duncan in San Francisco at a coffee house, and that Duncan visited him at his home in North Dakota before being arrested. Then on December 12th of 1997, the state then revokes Duncan's parole and reinstates the remainder of his prison sentence with time off for previous good behavior, so he is later released from prison on July 14th of 2000. Now, why I think this is very prevalent is because if we go back, in 1996, two girls in Seattle go missing, Sammy Jo White and Cameron Kubas. They went missing around the same time that he was free from parole. Shocking, I know. On April 4th of 1997, 10-year-old Anthony Martinez was kidnapped from his home in California, and 2 weeks later, he was found in the desert, nude and beaten. Investigators also noted that he was sexually assaulted. And later in about July of 2005, after Duncan had already started his appearances, people started to notice a similarity in Martinez's case with the Groene case. Shasta also told investigators that Duncan did confess to the White and Shasta did tell investigators that Duncan did confess to the murders in 1996 of the two little girls and of Anthony Martinez. July 13th in 2005, Duncan did appear in court and was charged with 3 counts of murder, first-degree murder, and 3 counts of kidnapping, all in conjunction with Brenda, Slade, and Mark. And later on, he would be charged in federal court for Dylan and Shasta, mainly due to the fact that going across state lines with children is considered a federal offense when you want to do explicit acts with them. Well, just in general, kidnapping them, but we'll throw in that to give the federal system a little bit of credit, I guess you could say. So on January 18th of 2007, he was later indicted into the United States District Court of Idaho and found guilty of 10 counts of kidnapping, kidnapping resulting in death, aggravated sexual abuse of a minor, and sexual exploitation of a child resulting in death, along with illegal firearm possession and vehicular theft. I have to read off my notes because his charges just go, and it's ridiculous what this guy has done. He then pled guilty in 2007 to all 10 charges against him on the condition that Shasta would not testify in the penalty phase of the trial, and due to the gag order, other details of that plea agreement has never been released. Then later, on August 27th of 2008, after a couple hours of deliberation, the jury then recommended the death penalty, and the judge did impose 3 death sentences for kidnapping resulting in death and the sexual exploitation of a child resulting in death, along with use of a firearm in a violent crime resulting in death. And that, of course, was all related to Dylan. Then later on November 3rd of 2008, Duncan was sentenced to an additional 3 consecutive terms of life without parole in federal prison for kidnapping Shasta and for sexually abusing Shasta and Dylan. He would later go on to California and would make a plea agreement with California for the Martinez case, only because the family pretty much agreed with the prosecution to not continue forward with the trial because they just wanted to heal from all of the tragedy that had happened. From what I have read, though I could be wrong, I did not see that he went to Seattle and had a court or a trial there for the 2 girls, but I also did not see if they had officially linked him to the cases of Sammy Jo and Carmen. Now I'm going to read what happened in the later stages of his appeals and such, just because it's such a heavy chunk and I want to make sure I get all of the facts correct, because I don't want to misspeak or something of that nature and get something wrong. So, on September of 2012, he was incarcerated in Terre Haute, Indiana, and on December 6th of 2013, a federal judge ruled that he was mentally competent when he gave up the right to appeal his death sentence. Psychiatrists working with the prosecution later diagnosed Duncan with pedophilia, sadistic personality disorder, and anti-personality disorder with narcissistic traits, but maintained that he was legally sane. Another third judge panel from the Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals ruled on March 27th of 2015 that the district judge that correctly determined that Duncan was mentally competent was correct. Along with February 28th of 2016, the United States Supreme Court then denied Duncan's petition to hear his appeal. And then again on February 28th of 2017, a petition for writ of habeas corpus was filed. And then later on September 27th of 2015, it was ordered that the governor's third motion for extension of time was granted in part and denied in part. And the governor's response was due by October 30th of 2017. And the petitioner's reply was due on or before January 30th of 2018. Duncan did have a blog called The Fifth Nail, and for those who don't know what the fifth nail means, it is considered that the fifth nail was the one that was supposed to pierce Jesus Christ's heart while he was on the cross, but the Romans instead hid the fifth nail or kept the fifth nail, and it's supposed to be this holy relic throughout the church, but it is supposedly missing or it's in a church somewhere. I'm not fully sure on the details. I haven't been to church since before my mom died, and I obviously don't really believe in that stuff, but to each their own. He did create a blog though, and it was these wild different things. I think you can actually still find it online, and later on he switched it over that he was blogging from federal prison, and according to whomever, I'm assuming it's his attorneys to probably cover their behinds, it was someone who he was sending letters to, and his name was silenced on the blog, and he was uploading whatever was written from Duncan onto these blogs up until his death. In 2016, Shasta did try to start a petition and put a law into place for Dylan and Slade, her two brothers that were killed, and it was pretty much that once the sex offenders do offend, they go to prison and they aren't released. And I personally believe that this is probably the best opportunity for that. But they went on a 3-strike verdict rule, where if a sex offender strikes 3 times, then they are officially put into prison and held. Shasta was trying to get it down to a 1-strike rule for the violent offenders, and by the time that the petition was closed, it had over 51,000 signatures. In October 2020, he underwent brain surgery for cancer, and he rejected chemotherapy and radiation therapy. And the medical staff predicted that he would last anywhere between 6 to 12 months, and he later died on March 28th of 2021 at the age of 58. And that's where his story ends. I was a little shocked to find out about him. I actually did not know about Duncan. I found out while researching for another person, and he popped up. With the Idaho 4, the Lori Vallow, and everything else going on in Idaho right now, it makes me almost sad to see that people have forgotten about the Groene family. I know Shasta has been in a few things here and there from what I've personally seen. I don't know if that's true, if she's been in the news currently or not, but it's just a heartbreaking story. She lost her entire family and has to grow up, or has to have grown up without them. But with all that being said, I hope you did enjoy. I hope it wasn't too disturbing. I try to be very mild with the things, but some of the stuff you just can't get around. I know it's difficult and some of the language can be hard. But with all that being said, I hope you all have a beautiful week, and I will see you all on Monday. Bye.